Call came at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 5, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a spreadsheet I couldn't make add up right. I was 31 years old, a senior financial analyst at a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I was trying to figure out how to cover my rent, my student loans, my car payment, and still have enough left over to send my parents their monthly $800, because yes, that was a thing I had been doing for 4 years, and somehow had convinced myself was normal. My phone buzzed across the table. My brother's name on the screen. He never called before 9, ever. "Hey," I said. "Something happened to Dad." They took him to St. Luke's overnight. Chest pains, possible cardiac episode, they weren't sure yet. My brother, who lives 40 minutes from my parents, who sees them every Sunday for dinner, who has never once sent them a dime because he has his own financial situation to worry about, had driven to the hospital at 2 in the morning and was now calling me, 6 states away, to ask if I could come home. I was on a flight out of Columbus by noon. I want to pause here and tell you something about my family, because it matters for everything that comes after. My parents have always been comfortable, not rich, but comfortable. My dad worked in insurance for 30 years. My mom taught elementary school until her knees got bad. They own their house outright. They have retirement accounts. They are not struggling. The $800 a month started when my dad's car needed a new transmission and they were short. I sent it once, then again, then it became expected. Then it became $800, and then sometimes $1,100 when there was something extra, a medical bill, a home repair, my brother's rent once when he lost a job, though he never knew I was the one who covered it. I never asked for it back. I never said no. I told myself it was what good daughters did. I landed in Pittsburgh at 3 p.m. and drove straight to the hospital. My dad was sitting up in bed eating Jell-O, looking slightly embarrassed. It was a minor cardiac event, a warning, the cardiologist said, not the thing itself. He needed rest, reduced stress, a change in diet. They'd keep him overnight for observation and likely discharge him in the morning. My mom was already making a list of what she needed from the grocery store. "You didn't have to fly in," my dad said. "Of course she did," my mom said, not looking up from her phone. "She's family." I stayed for 3 days. I cooked. I reorganized their medications. I drove my dad to his follow-up appointment and sat in the exam room taking notes on his discharge instructions while my mom waited in the car because doctors' offices give her anxiety. I canceled 2 important meetings at work and used vacation days I'd been saving since January. On the morning I was supposed to leave, my mom sat across from me at the breakfast table and said, "We've been thinking. Your cousin Daphne is getting married in Savannah in April. We'd really love to go." I said that sounded nice. She put her coffee cup down. "The venue deposit is due next week. Daphne's parents can't cover the whole thing. We thought maybe you could help." I looked at her. "How much?" $6,000. I flew home with the bank transfer pending. The next 8 months were a slow dismantling of everything I'd been building. The wedding contributions didn't stop at $6,000. There were bridesmaid dress alterations my mom wanted to pay for, a hotel block for the family, a rehearsal dinner gift, my brother's portion of the hotel because again, his situation. I was spending, by my calculation, somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 a month on my family. I had stopped contributing to my 401k. I had a savings account with $340 in it. I was also, during this time, working the hardest I had ever worked in my life. My company was preparing for a major acquisition. I was leading the due diligence team. I was getting in at 7, leaving at 8, eating lunch at my desk, skipping workouts, skipping sleep, running on caffeine and the vague promise that once this was over, things would calm down. They didn't calm down. In October, I started getting headaches, bad ones, behind my left eye, that would build over the course of the day and peak around 3 in the afternoon. I mentioned it to my doctor at my annual appointment. She asked about my stress levels, my sleep, my diet. I said they were all fine. She looked at me with an expression that suggested she did not believe me. My blood pressure was 148/96 at 31 years old. "You need to slow down," she said. I told her I would. I meant it. I just needed to get through the acquisition. The acquisition closed in November. My company threw a party. My boss gave a speech in which he specifically mentioned my name and said something about how the deal wouldn't have happened without me. People clapped. I smiled and drank a glass of sparkling water because I was too tired to drink anything else. That night, my mom called to tell me that she and my dad were thinking about taking a cruise for their anniversary in February, and could I look into options? I said sure. 3 weeks later, she called back to say they'd found a 10-day Caribbean cruise. It was $4,200 for both of them, and she knew it was a lot to ask. I said I'd figure it out. I don't know exactly when my body decided it had had enough. I don't know if it was a specific moment or just the slow accumulation of everything. The blood pressure, the sleeplessness, the skipped meals, the constant low-grade hum of financial terror I'd been ignoring for years. What I know is that on a Thursday in January, I was standing at the printer on the 4th floor of my office building, waiting for a contract to print, and the room tilted. That's the only way I can describe it. The room tilted, and then I wasn't standing anymore. I woke up in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and a nurse asking me if I knew where I was. Columbus, I said. My voice sounded far away. You're at Riverside Methodist, she said. You passed out at work. Your coworker called 911. My coworker, not my family, my coworker, a woman named Greta who sat 2 desks over from me and had apparently caught me before I hit the floor. They ran tests. Blood pressure on arrival was 162/104. I was dehydrated. I hadn't eaten anything that day except half a granola bar. They mentioned the word hypertensive crisis in a tone that was not casual. They admitted me. I called my mom from the hospital bed at 7 in the evening. She picked up on the second ring. Mom, I'm in the hospital. I collapsed at work. There was a pause. Oh, honey, what happened? I told her what the doctors had said. High blood pressure, exhaustion. They wanted to monitor me for at least 2 days, possibly run a cardiac workup given my dad's history. Another pause. Ben, oh, okay. Well, we're actually leaving tomorrow morning. I thought I'd heard her wrong. What? For the cruise. We board Saturday in Fort Lauderdale. We drove down to your aunt's place in Boca last week to visit before we sail. I texted you. She had, I remembered now, a text I'd seen and not responded to because I'd been in back-to-back meetings. Mom, I'm in the hospital. I know, sweetheart, but the cruise is non-refundable. We'd lose the whole deposit. I lay there in the hospital bed, the IV dripping steadily into my arm, and I did not say anything for a long moment. Your brother is in town, she said. I'll let him know. She did not come. My dad did not come. My brother texted me that night, hey, heard you're at Riverside, that sucks, feel better. And that was it. For 6 days, I was alone in that hospital. My coworker Greta brought me a plant on day 2. She sat with me for an hour and told me about her own health scare 3 years earlier and said, very quietly, you have to stop running yourself into the ground for people who don't notice. I didn't say anything. I stared at the plant. My direct manager emailed to say the whole team was thinking of me and not to worry about anything at work. My skip-level boss called personally to check in. 2 of my colleagues sent cards. Not one person from my family, other than those 2 texts, made contact for 6 days. I had a lot of time to think. On day 6, the doctors told me I was ready to be discharged. My blood pressure had stabilized. They had a care plan. I needed to follow up with a cardiologist, reduce stress, eat regular meals, sleep. The usual things people say when your body has staged a revolt. I was sitting in bed waiting for my discharge paperwork when my mom walked through the door. She was tan. She had a new tote bag with a cruise line logo on it. She was smiling. You look so much better, she said, dropping into the chair beside my bed like she'd seen me just last week. The cruise was wonderful, by the way. You would have loved the stops in Cozumel. I looked at her. She leaned over and patted my hand. You really scared us, you know. I didn't say anything. The nurse came in a few minutes later with my discharge paperwork, a folder of instructions, prescriptions, follow-up appointment cards. She also handed my mom something separately, a manila envelope. This was left at the nurse's station for your daughter, she said. Someone's been leaving things each day. We should have mentioned it sooner. I apologize. My mom took the envelope with a polite smile, then she opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. At the top was a handwritten note. The visitor log is included at your request. Admissions desk. Apparently, at some point earlier in the week, my mom had called the hospital to ask if anyone had been to see me. I didn't know she'd done that. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe it was something else. The admissions desk had printed the visitor log and left it for her. She was scanning it when I saw her expression change. The tan didn't fade exactly, but something in her face went very still. I watched her eyes move down the page. Stop. Move back up. Stop again. Mom? She didn't answer right away. Who is Elliot Crane? She said. I didn't know anyone named Elliot Crane. That was the truth, or what I believed was the truth in that moment, sitting in a hospital bed in Columbus, Ohio, watching my mother's face do something I had never seen it do before. The visitor log showed that someone by that name had signed in to see me on days 2, 3, 4, and 5 of my stay. Each time, he'd signed in during evening visiting hours. Each time, he'd listed himself as family friend. He'd sat with me, a person he'd apparently told the nurses I was sleeping and he hadn't wanted to wake me, for between 45 minutes and 2 hours each visit. I had been asleep or sedated for most of those days. I hadn't known anyone was there. My mom set the paper down in her lap. She looked out the window. Mom, I said, who is he? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to wonder if she was going to say anything at all. Then she said, he was someone I knew. A long time ago, before your father. I waited. Before your father, she said again, and this time, I understood what she meant. The story came out in pieces over the next 2 hours, sitting in that hospital room while my discharge paperwork went unsigned on the tray table. His name was Elliot Crane. My mother had been with him when she was 23. Serious, she said. Serious enough that she thought they might get married. But his work took him to Seattle and she didn't want to move, and they'd ended badly. She met my dad 6 months later. She found out she was pregnant 3 months after that. She said she'd always told herself she didn't know. She said she'd spent 32 years telling herself there was no reason to wonder. She said my dad was my dad, end of story, and she had built her entire life on that. But she'd known Elliot was still in Ohio. She'd seen his name in a newspaper article years ago. He'd started a company, something in manufacturing. She'd never reached out. She'd never told him anything. Somehow. She didn't know how, she said, and I believed her. He had found out about me. Maybe through mutual connections. Maybe through the internet. Maybe through something she didn't want to examine too closely. He had found out I was in the hospital. He had come. Every night for 4 nights, he had come and sat next to my bed while I slept. I didn't say anything for a long time after she finished. Then I said, "You need to leave." She looked at me. "I need you to take that folder, and I need you to leave, and I need you to not call me for a while." Sweetheart. Mom. My voice was very steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. I've been in this hospital for 6 days. You were on a cruise. I have been sending you money every month for 4 years. I collapsed because I was working myself to death partly to keep up with everything you've asked me for, and the first thing you do when you walk in here is tell me about Cozumel. I stopped. I need you to leave. She left. I called the number on the visitor log that afternoon. He picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was quiet, a little careful, like someone who had been expecting this call for a while but wasn't sure he was ready for it. I said, "I'm the woman you visited in the hospital, room 412. A pause. Then, "I know who you are." We talked for a long time. He was 61 years old, divorced, had 2 adult sons in Portland. He'd started a manufacturing company in Akron that he'd sold 5 years ago. He lived in a suburb outside Columbus, had for 8 years, which meant he had been 40 minutes away from me for nearly a decade. He told me he'd found out about me through a cousin of my mother's, who'd had too much wine at a family reunion, and said something she shouldn't have. That was 7 years ago. He hadn't reached out because he hadn't known how, and because he was afraid of me, of my reaction, of what it might mean for my parents' marriage, of disrupting my life. He'd looked me up online and followed my life from a distance. My college graduation photos, my LinkedIn profile, A local news article about my company's acquisition? When he'd seen me listed as a patient through a connection he had at the hospital, a friend on the administrative board, a coincidence that still gives me chills, he hadn't thought about it. He'd just come. "Every night," I said, "for 4 nights. You looked like you needed someone there," he said simply. I had to put the phone down for a second. When I picked it back up, I asked him one thing. "Did you know, before the cousin told you? Did you ever suspect?" He was quiet. "I had wondered," he said. "The timing, I'd wondered. And I didn't push it. I should have. I know I should have. But I was 24, and I'd just moved across the state, and I told myself it wasn't my business." He paused. "I've had a long time to regret that. I didn't start transferring money to my parents the following month. That sounds like a small thing, but if you've spent 4 years treating something as inevitable, stopping is its own kind of seismic shift. I drafted an email to my mom 3 times before I actually sent it. It was short. It said that I needed to focus on my own financial recovery, that my doctors had been clear I needed to reduce stress, and that I would not be able to continue sending money. She called twice. I let it go to voicemail. My dad called once. I texted him back and said I loved him and I wasn't ready to talk yet, but I would be eventually. My brother called to ask if I was doing okay and somehow turned it into a 40-minute conversation about his own situation. I said I had to go. I started seeing a therapist. The first thing my therapist said, after I spent 45 minutes summarizing the preceding 4 years, was, "What do you want your life to look like? Not what did I owe people. Not what did I owe people expect. What did I want?" I sat with that question for a week. I had dinner with Elliot Crane in March, a restaurant downtown, neutral ground, late afternoon when it wasn't too crowded. I was nervous in a way I couldn't entirely explain. Not about danger, just about the size of what we were sitting down to do. He was tall, with gray at his temples and a kind of deliberate quietness about him that I recognized, inexplicably, in myself. We didn't talk about my mother. We didn't talk about the past or the what-ifs or what a DNA test might confirm. We talked about Columbus and his sons and my job and a book he'd been reading. We talked like 2 people who were figuring out, carefully and without rushing, what they might mean to each other. Before we left, he said, "I don't want to make any claims on you. I want you to know that. Whatever you want from this, or nothing, if that's what you want, I'll respect it." I thought about my hospital room, the 4 nights I hadn't known anyone was there. "I want to have dinner again sometime," I said. "That's enough for now?" He nodded. "That's more than I expected." We walked out into the cold March air, and I stood on the sidewalk for a minute after he drove away, just breathing. My bank account had $4,800 in it, the most it had held in 3 years. My blood pressure was 118/76. I had a cardiologist appointment on Friday, and a therapy session the following Tuesday, and a standing lunch with Greta every other Wednesday that had become, without my fully noticing, the most consistent thing in my week. My mom texted the following week to say she was sorry, that it wasn't a good enough word, but she was using it anyway, that she'd done a lot of things wrong and she knew it. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond that day, or the next. But I saved it. I'm still figuring out what kind of relationship I want with my family, if any, for now, on what terms. I'm still figuring out what Elliot Crane is to me, or what he might become. I'm still, honestly, figuring out who I am, outside of being the person everyone called when they needed something. But I know one thing I didn't know, a year ago, and it's this. The only person who came and sat with me in the dark, night after night, when I was lying in a hospital bed alone, was a stranger who had spent 32 years quietly wondering if I existed. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to keep saying yes when every part of you is screaming no. Not the money, though the money was real, and the number, when I finally added it up, made me sit down and stare at the wall for a long time. I mean the other cost, the one that doesn't show up in a bank statement, the cost of watching yourself disappear in slow motion while telling yourself it's love. That's what I was doing. I know that now. I called it being a good daughter. I called it family. But the truth, if I'm being honest about it, is that I had confused loyalty with self-erasure, and I'd been doing it for so long that I didn't even notice the line anymore. The collapse on the fourth floor of my office building wasn't an accident, it was a consequence. My body had been keeping an honest record of everything my mind refused to acknowledge: the skipped meals, the sleepless nights, the blood pressure creeping upward, the headaches I explained away. Cause and effect doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care that you meant well. It just adds things up until the total is too large to ignore. What I had to reckon with, lying in that hospital bed, was that I had participated in my own exhaustion. I made the transfers. I bought the plane ticket. I answered the phone. Nobody held a gun to my head. And that's a hard thing to sit with because it's easier to be purely a victim than to admit you've had some hand in your own situation. But the moment I stopped blaming and started being honest, with myself first, then with my mother, was the moment something actually shifted. The intelligence part of it, if I can call it that, was learning to see clearly. For years I told myself a story where everyone else's needs were urgent and mine could wait. That story was comfortable, and it nearly killed me. What I had to develop, slowly, imperfectly, with the help of a therapist and a coworker who caught me before I hit the floor, was the ability to look at a situation and call it what it actually was. Not what I wished it were. Not what other people told me it was. What it actually was. And the hardest thing of all was choosing to stay standing afterward, to not send the money in November, to let the calls go to voicemail, to sit in a restaurant across from a stranger named Elliot Crane and be present for that conversation instead of running from it. None of that felt brave in the moment. It just felt necessary. It felt like the first time in years I was making choices that came from some actual center of myself, rather than from fear or guilt or habit. I don't have a tidy ending to offer. My family is complicated. Elliot Crane is complicated. I am still, some days, complicated. But I know what it feels like now to wake up in the morning and not immediately start calculating what I owe someone. That feeling is new. I'm not taking it for granted. The man who sat beside my hospital bed for 4 nights while I slept didn't owe me anything either. He just showed up. That's the version of love I'm trying to build my life around now.